Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend. Before going any further though, please make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So this weekend, indeed, as the estimates were saying, has been dominated, as it were, by the movie Free Guy, which once again repeats in the #1 spot. Free Guy, the new film from Ryan Reynolds and 20th Century Studios, one of the holdovers from the 20th Century Fox deal that was in production before Disney took over, having probably one of the most impressive week 1 to week 2 drops, only dropping 34% from week 1 to week 2. And it actually is, again, pretty impressive seeing that most films, especially films with a little bit of a higher budget, tend to see films drop off by about 50% or around that number. So a 34% drop domestically from week 1 to week 2, a pretty strong number there. It is now at $58.8 million domestically, which again, for the first 2 weeks is pretty impressive. The big problem, though, with Free Guy is the fact that it did cost a fair amount to make, and we actually don't really know exactly how much money extra they had to pay for marketing with all of the various delays for not just this, but every film really that come out this year. Coming into the #2 spot is Paw Patrol, the movie. I only know about Paw Patrol as being an uncle. Now, of course, a father, but one of my nephews was a big fan of that show growing up, and so that's pretty much all that I really know about the show. And so now there is a movie from Paramount making $13 million domestically in its opening weekend, and this, I believe, is a day-and-date release coming out simultaneously on Paramount Plus, and so $13 million, not too shabby there, but of course, still not nearly as much as I feel like a lot of other animated kids films would typically make during a normal time of the year. Jungle Cruise still making money, $6.23 million. I know there's been some people to speculate that because the legs on this film seem to be pretty strong. As you can see, it's getting pretty close to $100 million domestically, now at around $92.5 million. It still cost over $200 million to make, and so the film, even though its legs are actually towards the upper end of even the projections that I had after its week 2, it is still a film where even if it's able to overperform continuously, it is not set to make its money back because it just cost way too much money in order to make the movie. And also, even though the drops are pretty nice from week to week, because of the initial number not being nearly as high as some of the other big budget films that would normally a big budget film would typically make during any given year, is obviously holding it back as well. Just because a percentage is a certain way doesn't mean that the number from that first week can just be ignored, right? So even though for Free Guy, for instance, a 34% drop, again, that's a pretty nice drop to see from week 1 to week 2. However, again, $18.7 million is still something that is not going to be nearly enough. Again, doesn't tell really the whole story there. Don't Breathe 2 coming in also in its second weekend, having a 52% drop. Again, that's kind of a standard drop-off that we typically see from most movies. So that film made another $5 million domestically. RESPECT from United Artists had a 57% drop, and this is a film that, even though it is definitely on the lower budget side of things, being under $100 million, which is kind of a sad thing in our state to say that is considered a low budget film or a lower budget. I wouldn't call it a low budget, but at least a lower budget film than most others. It is, pretty much guaranteed to be a financial flop at this point, since it's really, again, not making a whole lot of money, whether it was the opening weekend or now. Again, 57% drop, only $3 million, $15 million domestically. It's not making much internationally, so that film is not set to be that impressive. Interestingly enough, The Suicide Squad, coming in its third week, has yet another 54% drop. So remember, last week it had a 71% drop, one of the largest drop-offs that we had seen. So another 54% drop, now losing over 1,000 theaters as well. This film only getting to around $49.2 million. Again, as I mentioned previously, The Suicide Squad obviously being impacted by HBO Max having this film available for free, which of course also means that it's going to be a lot more readily available on various piracy websites, and also the film just not being very good is adding to that discourse as well, and really just cannot be ignored. Obviously, financial success or failure does not mean that the film or any film is good or bad. However, this just so happens to be a case where a film that's really objectively not that very good is not really making a whole lot of money. New films that come out this weekend all came in at the 7, 8, 9 slots. So The Protege from Lionsgate, which seemed somewhat interesting to me, starring Maggie Q and Michael Keaton, it still kind of just came across as the generic generic femme fatale type film, which I think we've all seen before in different ways. So it really depends, I guess, on whether you like those actors and not necessarily the story that they're going to be telling. But that film made $2.9 million, not coming out in a wide way, just again, over 2,500 screens it is debuting at. So again, not nearly a small, limited release by any means, but definitely not close to the 3,000 to 4,000 that you would typically see from a bigger budget film. So again, this is a film that coming out from Lionsgate in its first weekend, not a very strong start for it. Can't really find much when it comes to a budget for the movie, so who knows about profitability. But based on what I'm seeing, it doesn't really seem likely that that will be the case. And also, I don't think this film is getting released anywhere on streaming since it is coming from Lionsgate. The Night House from Searchlight. So this is more of an independent film coming out at a little over 2,200 screens, made around $2.8 million. Really don't know much about that film, to be honest. And rounding out the top 10, Reminiscence is the new film, $2 million from Warner Brothers, another film on HBO Max, about 75% of the way through the movie. And even though I think there are some pretty fun, cool aspects to it, and visually it actually looks pretty good, I think that the story, it kind of just, there's just something kind of grating about it. There's a voiceover throughout the film, and I just feel like it is very much borrowing from a lot of other films, trying to rely very much on the mystery. And so basically, depending, I guess, on if there's any twists and turns that I don't really see coming, kind of elevating the rest of the story, which doesn't seem to be happening at this point. Obviously, still got a little bit left in the film to go, then it could very much have this film make a lot of sense to me as well, as why it's not really making a whole lot. This coming out at over 3,000 theaters, but also day-and-date release HBO Max, which, as we've seen, is a huge way for them to be able to take money away from theaters, essentially, because, when it comes to these studios, they are not really doing that poorly when you take into account how much money they are getting from their streaming services. And so when you look to these, when we look to these movies and their numbers, all we can see are financial failures and films not making back their money. But the studios, I feel, are in a position now where they kind of just don't really care. So these films can be financial failures based on any given metric, but because they're making so much money in other locations, they're like, oh yeah, it's not that big a deal, which for me, financially, is just kind of crazy, but obviously it is what it is. Black Widow, now out in its 7th week, dropping some theaters once again, so a little over 1,000 theaters that this film has been out in, $180 million domestically, as I mentioned previously in other videos where we were closer to this release, did not make a whole lot internationally, so this is a film that is still very much in the flop territory, and again, not making nearly enough to make its money back. Going into some of the films, one thing to note is that normally I'd pull up the numbers pages for some films, but it turns out that the numbers is still a little bit behind on some of the numbers and the reporting. So I do have those updated in my box office chart coming from sites like Box Office Mojo, which seem to be a little bit quicker when it comes to updating those numbers. So again, we'll get to those other films, but the films that I can talk about are films like The Protege. Again, $2.9 million for this movie. Really nothing being said as far as how much the film cost. If I had to take a guess, I'd say probably around $50 million or maybe a little under $50 million based off the people in the film and the type of film that is being portrayed. Wouldn't make be a bit that much of a surprise for it to cost around $50 million, maybe a little bit less. Reminiscence actually cost quite more than I thought it did. It definitely came across as feeling more like an independent film, but it ended up costing around $68 million to make, making only $5 million internationally. Again, not a very good start for this movie. It is indeed coming out at the same time on HBO Max, but all we can really base off financial success of an individual film is what we get from the box office numbers. Jungle Cruise, as I've mentioned, is doing better than what the numbers would suggest. It's around $164 million internationally at this point. However, this is a lot better than what the initial numbers would have indicated. It is very much a film that's still making enough domestically week to week for it to perform better than even my early projections had. It is still very far away from ever being able to reach profitability at this point. But again, that is something that is something that Disney will try and explain away through their Disney Plus numbers, which, remember, really can't be very verified at this point. And then the Suicide Squad, $140 million internationally. Again, not doing much anywhere, really. And even though it's on HBO Max, I think that only gives you kind of part of the story, especially when this film cost a fair amount of money to make as well. So another financial failure for Warner Brothers. And add on top of that, a film like Reminiscence, they're not really doing well as far as their individual films making any money are concerned. All right, so going now over to my box office breakdown chart. Again, you can find this over on my website, ombreviews.com, as well as plenty of other things as well. As you can see, Reminiscence made $5 million, Paw Patrol internationally $34.5 million, Protege $2.9, Free Guy in its second weekend actually crossing the $100 million mark, making it $111 million for its second weekend. Don't Breathe 2 at $27 million for its second weekend, and Respect at $16 million. And so we can now make some projections on those three movies. And so it looks like Free Guy will make somewhere between $159 and $223.8 million, which might sound impressive based on pandemic numbers and also the fact that it had such a low drop-off. And if it continues, that means that it could very well outperform my max projection, as we'll see in a little bit when we talk about Jungle Cruise. However, even then, it is still a quite long way for it to be able to make back its money because of gigantic financial cost for the actual film. Talking about Don't Breathe 2, again, now this film is expected to make anywhere between $27 and $54 million based off of what we have in its second weekend. $38 million to $54 million total. Respect, RESPCT, expected to make somewhere between 23 and 32 million, which is a pretty abysmal showing based off of the much higher than expected budget for that movie. Talking a little bit about what we can project for as far as losses or gains are concerned, Free Guy, as I mentioned, is doing better than what many expected it to make, but it is still going to be somewhere between negative $76 and negative $38 million by the end of its run. And so even though one could argue that negative $38 million is a bit closer than what maybe originally people would thought the film would have been as a financial loss, it has to really continue to do well in the domestic marketplace. It also has to have a very strong showing in a place like China, for instance. But even then, if the China number is just randomly gigantic, that does not tell the entire story, since they get very little return on their investment for that movie. For Don't Breathe 2, as you can see, the film is expected to lose between $14 and $4 million. So very much close to that break-even point. So this is a movie that absolutely could break even, if not in theaters, then potentially on 4K Blu-ray release, because it is just that close to making it, especially when the film costs a lot less than the other films that come out this year. You then look to RSPCT, $55 million production budget. So again, a lot higher than you would expect. With marketing, that's $82.5 million, meaning the film is going to be somewhere between negative $68 and negative $62 million loss. And this is a film that is not really doing well week to week, with that 50% drop off after an abysmal opening weekend in comparison to its budget, especially. So this is, again, a film not likely to make any of its money back as such. As I mentioned previously about Jungle Cruise, so it's actually around $173 million worldwide at this point in time. And that means that the film is right now around 53%. So basically the week 2 number is 53% of the entire total, which means that it's every week getting closer to being better than expected. So the low end that I typically give, or rather the best case scenario that I give in my charting, is, let's say, assuming a film makes 50% of its box office in the first 2 weeks. That's a very strong film. It's a film that, again, if it makes 50% of its box office in those first 2 weeks, it means that those legs are incredibly strong. It's having very minimal drop off from week to week. It's making money in other locations. This film is getting very close to reaching that maximum projection that I originally had for the movie. And you've seen, again, there have been cases and situations where films have been able to get pretty close to that location even this year. But even with that being the case, the film is still set to lose anywhere between $220 and $188 million. And so, again, doing better than expected. It still needs to make a crap ton in order for it to be profitable. And then for a film like The Suicide Squad, and now at $140.7 million worldwide, this film's still set to lose around $176 to $136 million. And again, you can argue all you want about HBO Max. It's still a film that is going to, again, be a much more of a financial loss for Warner Brothers than for anyone else at this point in time. And I believe those are really the only films to make any point to whatsoever. But as I said, with Jungle Cruise, this is something that I've actually been updating with my charting, is you'll see these actual percentages. What this is basically how the first 2 weeks compare to the final results. So you'll see that the newer films that have just gotten projections are at 100%, because obviously their first 2 weeks are going to be the same as their current number, and all the other films are going to be several weeks out. And so as you can see, you have a film like Suicide Squad, who's, again, 84% is what is made so far compared to its first 2 weeks. Jungle Cruise at 53% as well. And so if you're wondering what these numbers numbers are. Basically, this is just a way of kind of checking me on my projections. And as you can see, most films will tend to fall somewhere between that 50 and 70% range. There are obviously some that do a lot worse than 70% and some that do even better than the 50% range. So for instance, this 39% right here would be for Cruella. Cruella actually did a lot better based on the legs of the film itself. And so this is a film that, again, is still expected to be a financial loss for Disney, but not nearly as much as could have been indicated earlier on. And if you take into account and trust their numbers from Disney Plus, then one could easily point out that they would have made up this $14 million loss as such. So even Cruella, theoretically, we could argue, was a financial success this year, but that's, again, if you take their Disney Plus numbers with any sense of seriousness. But what are your thoughts about the box office this weekend? Are you surprised that Free Guy is doing as well as it's done? Again, I've heard some mixed things about it. Some have liked it, some have hated it, some walked out of it, and some loved it so much they want to go see it again. So I really feel like we're just in that position in the box office right now where there just really isn't a whole lot of films that are making everyone happy, that's making everyone want to go see it, because even though we could argue Free Guy having a small drop-off seems to indicate that there's some positivity around it, it's still not making nearly as much as a film with this kind of a budget would typically make. And so there's obviously still a lot of people not wanting to go to a theater, either because of being fearful of Delta variant, or potentially also just because they don't really feel the drive to go to see a movie like Free Guy as being the film that's going to bring them back into theaters. Lots of things going on, lots of reasons why we're seeing the numbers this way, but the fact still remains, these are movies that are not, again, making any real money whatsoever. And I think this is kind of an indication that studios are very much planning to leave theaters behind in the dust, which makes me very sad because I love the theater going experience despite the various flaws that exist. And we're looking again at these studios just making as much money as they possibly can on their own dime with the streaming services and with the various deals and tax breaks and all these other things going on, because all of their friends are also in Congress, and the theaters in the end are the ones that end up getting the shaft. So anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section below. What film out of this weekend especially did you like? Did you see Reminiscence on HBO Max since it is free? Let me know what your thoughts are. Did you get to see The Protege? Not a lot of people did, but hey, is it kind of just a generic femme fatale movie that is not that special, or is there something more to it that we should be aware of? Let me know, and let everyone know in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button. It really does mean a lot. Please also like and share this video with those that you think might enjoy it. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my August Locals, Patreon, and Subscribe Star members. Starting off with my Locals crew: Cat's App, The Real It, D Sharp, Biffer the Hobbit, Robert Barnes, and Goblin Squatch. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Locals. And now on to my Patreon members: Andrew Hoyle, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father. Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Lance, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Benden, Tina Bojan, and Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. Thank you very much for supporting me over on Patreon. And lastly, to my Subscribe Star peeps: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B., Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. And a shout out to one new member, Hannibal Grimm. And a huge shout out to newest members, Brandon and Joe Horn. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Subscribestar, and to everyone for supporting me on these platforms. Also, a shout out to all of my YouTube members. You get shouted out at the end of every single live stream. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video, please check out my Locals Patreon Subscribe Star. And you can go ahead and find those links in the top link of this description. You can find it's called the Willow link, and it'll have a list to literally all of the social media platforms and all of the different ways that you can support the channel. If you join at the $1 level, you can actually get your name shouted out at the end of every single video and live stream. $5 level gives you that, plus you get access to exclusive giveaways of 4K titles. Right now, I've got tons of 4K steelbooks to give away this month, including for Top Gun. I also have A Quiet Place Part 2, I have Snatch on 4K, the John Wick trilogy on 4K, and also I have a Sicario 4K disc as well, and a bunch of others that are going to be coming in this month too. So if you want to have access to any of those types of exclusive giveaways, join at the Army of Asgard level. At the $10 level, the Keeper of the Bifrost level, you get all of that, plus you get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, including instant reactions when I go to see movies. I do quick little filmings of myself and talk about the films that I have seen and my instant reactions to that. You also get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger once or twice a month, and you get to also ask us any question that you want. We put a Q&A post up, and you get to ask us whatever it is that you want to ask. So again, if that sounds cool to you, Keeper of the Bifrost level. And lastly, there is the Chosen of Valhalla level, where you get all of that stuff. Plus, in your first month as a Chosen of Valhalla member, you get a free t-shirt, your choice, ship it anywhere in the world, and also you get to once a month be featured on the OMB Reviews channel, and you get to talk with me. We usually chill out for 3 to 4 hours, and I ask everyone what they've been watching, what they want to talk about, what they want to promote, and it's always a really good time. And so if that sounds interesting to you, please consider joining. That is going to be on Subscribestar and on Patreon only, as Locals is just the Keeper of the Bifrost level. But anyway, thank you all very much for your time, for your support, and for listening to this shout-out video. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.